along here or not, but I think for the moment, if you'll allow this to be an individual ring, it's fainter than this component or this component, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rings at Neptune.
Scientists are also learning more about Neptune's bizarre moon, Triton. They say they're finding nitrogen, polar ice caps, and ice volcanoes that once oozed partially frozen liquids. For Voyager 2 to get good pictures in space, people on the ground need to determine where to point the cameras. Dan Blackburn has this profile of the head of Voyager's imaging team.
Every weekday morning, Candace Hansen, mother, drops 3-year-old Christy off at her daycare center. Minutes later, her mind is billions of miles away as she studies pictures of worlds that very few other human eyes have seen.
I'm a space photographer. I figure out where to point the cameras at what time, with what filters and what exposures.
As the experiment representative for the Voyager imaging science team, Hansen has spent the last 12 years working with 20 colleagues from institutions all over the country. Hansen's job is to help decide how Voyager should take its pictures to meet specific science objectives.
Starting in December, we started taking images of Neptune. And the reason was partly just to get our exposure times right, because we don't know that much about Neptune, and especially from the ground, where it's very small in Earth-based telescopes. The most exciting moment of that time was finding our great dark spot. And we were not really sure that with our cameras, which are in the visible wavelengths of light, that we would see any contrast. And to see something that large and that similar to perhaps the great red spot on Jupiter was incredibly exciting.
Like the rest of the Voyager family, Hansen has her favorite encounter and her favorite pictures.
Discovering the volcanoes on Io and discovering that Jupiter had a ring, that was tremendous. I think that the part of the fun of encounters is knowing that we're going to be surprised. At Saturn, we didn't think we'd see any detail in the rings because we wouldn't be able to resolve individual ring particles, and we didn't even conceive that there could be the radial structure that there is or the spokes. We just didn't even imagine. Our imaginations are too small. And so what I'm looking forward to the most at Neptune is being surprised. It's like, okay, what's Neptune going to have that we never would have anticipated?
Candy Hansen and all the members of the Voyager team consider themselves a privileged group who have had the good fortune to be part of one of the greatest adventures of our time. Dan Blackburn, CNN, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
From the south, one of 2 on the planet. And by the way, the colors are drawn from images that first look like this. And then there's Neptune's mysterious backward orbiting moon, Triton.
It's a strange object. That surface is very, very strange.
Very strange, with nitrogen and methane ice on its surface, volcanoes that once spewed frozen chemicals instead of molten lava, and a haze of nitrogen and methane around it.
And I suspect they're going to have to explain it because that's the way it is.
And explaining it is what this is all about, because this is nature in its very rawest form. The planets they're looking at are out there existing under the basic laws of physics. These people are trying to understand how they manage themselves that far from the sun. Carol?
Jim, it was quite a wonderful picture show. I guess one of the most interesting things we learned from Voyager is that Neptune has rings. How significant a finding is that?
Well, when you find rings around a planet, you find some history of its construction. Here is debris that may have been left over from the formation of the planet that's being held by its magnetic field, or perhaps this is some object that's been captured by its magnetic field, captured into orbit, and has later collapsed. You can tell a lot by looking at the rings. It says a lot about the environment of that place.
It's obviously been a spectacular journey that we've shared with Voyager through those pictures and data it sent back to Earth, and I'm sure everybody's enjoyed this show, but tell us what the real importance of the mission will be.
Well, for you and me, maybe not too much except to satisfy our basic curiosity. The real payoff is for the children. When you and I were kids, there was not very much known about the outer planets at all. As a matter of fact, Neptune had less than a half a page in our science book. Today, look at the history that is being rewritten, and being rewritten instantly as these pictures come through. that people are learning a great deal. This is the end of an exploratory era, that is the end of Voyager, but a new one has already begun with the Mariner flight to Venus. There'll be more exploration through the rest of this century to Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and an endless and thrilling episode of exploration that we'll all get to watch, just the way we did with Voyager.
I can hardly wait. Thank you, Jim Slade at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena.
Scientists are thrilled by what they see in the newest photos, 3 more rings around the planet Neptune. Joining us now live, CNN's Dan Blackburn, who is at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California.
The Voyager spacecraft now is about 2 million miles away from Neptune, heading outbound now and toward the outer reaches of our solar system. In the days before its close encounter with Neptune, much speculation focused around the question of rings. Would Neptune have them? Some experts predicted that the blue planet would have some rings. Others said, no way, no rings to be found. Well, today, scientists said there are indeed 5 rings around Neptune, at least 5. There were 2 that were seen on the way in, 2 bright rings. Now 3 more have been identified, somewhat harder to see, but there nonetheless. In addition, the outer bright ring appears to have at least a half-dozen moonlets embedded in it. All of this has stirred a great deal of excitement among scientists, particularly among members of the imaging team, one of whom joins us here right now. That is Dr. Torrance Johnson. Dr. Johnson, we talk about pictures, and some of them we have yet to see. Why is that?
Spacecraft was very busy when we were closest to Neptune, and we stored a lot of pictures on the tape recorder. Those pictures are just now hitting the ground today, tomorrow, a few even coming down a little later.
So there are some surprises yet to come, probably visually.
I think so. It's good stuff.
Torrance, when we look at some of the pictures that we've seen, you take a look at rings and moons and all of these images that come back, and we have now one of the late ring pictures. What does this tell us?
Well, this is basically your discovery pictures. We're trying to find out where they are, how many they are, and what their characteristics are, how wide they are, and how far they extend around the planet, for instance.
We see the 2 brightest rings here, and of course I guess we call it the chunky ring out there, the outer one.
And you can see in that ring, for instance, you can see condensations or brightness, areas where the brightness is obviously greater in some areas than others, and that's part of the reason why we talked about ring arcs, partial rings. We now know that these rings do extend all the way around, but their thickness or their what we call the optical thickness, your ability to see them, varies from one side to the other by a tremendous amount.
Here's our friend Nereid, one of the only 2 moons that were seen from Earth.
This is unfortunately our best picture of Nereid. Nereid orbits very far from Neptune, and Voyager didn't get very close to it since we wanted to get close to Neptune. This is taken at about half Nereid, if you will, and so the left-hand side is the lit side of it there. It does give us enough information to tell us how big it is and about how bright it is.
This is now the 2nd largest moon, and we just have a number for it.
Right, 1989 N1. The International Astronomical Union will give it a name sometime in the next couple of years. We got a lot closer to this than we did in Nereid, since this is in the inner part of the system. And this looks quite a bit like other small moons we've seen before. Lots of impact craters on it. This is, I believe, a picture of 1989 N2, yes, the other one of the regular satellites we got to look at. And these are irregular shaped objects because they've been battered about quite a bit by meteoroid impacts.
And these, there are some moons we have not seen, but now we're seeing something else. We're looking at Neptune and the reddish...
This is a what we call a false color picture. This picture was put together from various parts of the spectrum where methane absorbs. And so this tells atmospheric scientists about the distribution of methane in the atmosphere of Neptune.
So you have a methane haze on Neptune?
The atmosphere has methane in it, and there's a cloud deck of methane down below, and we think that some of the features that we see are perhaps sort of like methane thunderheads and methane cirrus clouds pushing up above that.
Which creates a picture in your mind that somehow is almost hard to imagine. Thunderheads of methane rolling across this great blue ball out there.
And it's a strange and fascinating place.
We also see here clouds that, I suppose you could see this on Earth, except of course they'd be water clouds.
This is the type of thing you see flying in an airplane. It's just that we've never seen this type of beautiful structure with the lighting angles showing us the altitudes of clouds on the outer planets before. just because of the way the planet's atmosphere scatter light. Neptune has been a particularly good target for getting this type of information about the atmosphere.
And all of this goes to show us just what a lovely planet Neptune actually has turned out to be. An ideal planet for the final encounter of the great grand tour of Voyager. I'm Dan Blackburn, CNN Live at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Prime News will continue after these messages.
CNN special coverage of the Voyager 2 is brought to you by Gitano, makers of clothing and accessories for the entire family. Gitano
At Neptune.
Voyager also sent back shots of Neptune's mysterious moon, Triton. Scientists call Triton a strange object. Its surface is covered with icy ridges and frozen lakes. Scientists say the pictures help them to settle a controversy over the composition of Triton.
The surface that you see, the visual surface that you see, where it's white, it is nitrogen, frost, or ice, with some lesser amount, perhaps, of frozen methane ice. And where it's dark, it is very likely to be photochemically modified methane, that is, long-chain hydrocarbons, materials of that sort.
As Voyager ends its multi-billion-mile journey, NASA scientists are looking forward to more pictures from future space probes. Dan Blackburn has that.
The Magellan mission is already speeding toward Venus, where it will use powerful radar to survey the strange landforms that lie beneath deep acid clouds. This fall, the Galileo mission launches a sophisticated spacecraft in Voyager's footsteps back to Jupiter. After the long journey, a probe will plunge for the first time into the mysterious and turbulent clouds. And Jupiter's gravity will whirl the spacecraft on a 2-year orbital tour. Jupiter's gravity will also slingshot a joint U.S.-European mission known as Ulysses, up and over the poles of the sun, perpendicular to the plane in which the planets orbit. This novel perspective will help us better understand our local star, which powers all life on Earth. And searching to understand our origins, there are plans for a brand new kind of spacecraft to fly by an asteroid, and then rendezvous with a comet, full of traces of the stuff from which our solar system formed, stored for 5 billion years in a cosmic deep freeze. The spacecraft will sample the comet's nucleus, and then travel together with it for 3 years as it loops around the sun. Another collaborative U.S.-European mission will send a spacecraft to orbit Saturn and send a probe down to the surface of its large moon, Titan, where the Voyager mission found evidence of the chemical precursors of life. And there are plans for ambitious missions to Mars. This time, they'll do more than just return beautiful pictures of pink skies and windy dunes. They are intended to prospect for pieces of Mars and send them back to Earth for study. These robot missions will also demonstrate technologies that may one day help humans explore the red planet. Missions that might involve many nations. Dan Blackburn, CNN, reporting.
In other news, Colombia's President Barco...
To send this instrument out there in space to capture a lot of things, including Neptune. Do you think the public's reaction is positive to this expenditure was right, and will this help boost the space program?
I think your figure's a little high. I think it was more like $550. It's my recollection, Brian. More like the cost of one stealth bomber. And comparing the two, I think that the public certainly would rather have this mission than a single stealth bomber. I can't believe that the public is not fascinated with this, and I don't know how significant the scientific data is or to what practical use it might be put, but I think it has to be a bonanza for science. It's something that's very exciting.
Howard?
Well, what I keep focusing on is the fact that this was launched 12 years ago. I think that's right. And to me, it's a reminder of what our aspirations used to be, if I can get a little high-flown about this for a second. We used to be, it seems, more interested in this kind of exploration than we now really are. And I personally would like to see us more interested, and I think basically it is popular politically to just look at it from the vantage point of my beat. I think it is a popular thing. And I think President Bush was on the right track when he tried to set some new goals for space exploration. But he's got to put some money into it if it's going to produce pictures 12 years from now.
Frank, I can't help but think of all of the exciting goals that we can set for ourselves, of which this is one. We've just talked about some others. Aid to Poland, catastrophic health insurance, a whole variety of things that we need money for, and we've got a shrinking budget. We've got limited resources. We've got Graham-Rudman targets we've got to meet. I don't know how we meet all those expenses. Somewhere we've got to cut.
Well, this is one of the few areas where the United States economy is still in the lead position in terms of high tech. Everything from materials used in space vehicles to launching, to aerodynamics, you name it. And I think it pays out in the long run if it's done right. And I think the civilian space program is a very, very worthy thing.
Speaker Foley's breakfast, a lot of other things he talked about yesterday.
Of space tonight, but continues to send back pictures that will rewrite the textbooks about the planet Neptune. Scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, have more surprises to report tonight. CNN's Dan Blackburn's been following the story.
The icy, intriguing rings of Neptune jumped back into the spotlight as the Voyager spacecraft beamed back photos taken as it raced away from its close encounter. The latest pictures of the rings revealed the existence of 3 new ones, bringing the total of known rings at Neptune to 5. However, the new rings are much harder to see than those recorded earlier by Voyager. The new rings resemble bands of dust. 2 lie between the earlier brighter rings, and the 3rd new one is closer in toward the planet. In addition, the rather clumpy outer ring has been found to have little moonlets embedded in it, which have handed the scientists another puzzle.
That certainly has the people in the Rings group thinking furiously at this point to see if they can see some mechanism whereby these embedded rocks in the ring can explain the structure of the ring. And I suspect they're going to have to explain it because that's the way it is.
In another surprise, scientists discovered that Neptune's magnetic field is tilted significantly from its axis. The tilt appears to be greater than 30 degrees. This reminds scientists of Uranus, the last planet visited by Voyager. There, the magnetic field was tilted 60 degrees. If you put all this against a model of Earth, Uranus's magnetic north then would be somewhere around where Los Angeles is located, and Neptune's magnetic north now would be somewhere near Anchorage, Alaska. Neptune's geographically complex moon Triton was pushed temporarily into the background while scientists took a longer look at dramatic photos of the remarkable satellite. Newly released close-ups show more evidence of the volcanic oozing of water, which created large lake-like craters. Those craters then were filled with frigid, flowing nitrogen on Triton's surface. Nitrogen makes up a large part of Triton's thin atmosphere, just as it does here on Earth. We also have gotten a better look at some of Neptune's other, smaller moons. This is Nereid, the only other moon known to exist from Earth-based observation. This is the large moon called N1, now the 2nd largest of Neptune's satellites. And this is the smaller moon N2. Official names are to come later. In all, Neptune now has at least 8 moons. New pictures of Neptune itself also were made available. This enhanced version shows the methane haze in the atmosphere as a reddish color around the planet. But many here believe pictures like these, showing Neptune's clouds, look more like our own Earth than any other planet in our solar system. Dan Blackburn, CNN at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
And the 5th number is 42, and the 6th number is 34. So tonight's official winning numbers 5, 25, 20, 45, 42, and 34. Join us tomorrow for Cash 3, and next Saturday for Lotto.